Welcome back to the Real Zone, the Commission. Okay, we did speak about in the previous video about God attacking ZANU-PF by taking away the major sponsor of ZANU-PF, the major sponsor which was guys from the GCC countries. God showed me that they are heart full of ZANU-PF. They are done. They're like they are not happy. There is no even though they are looking into Africa and into partnering with Africa as GCC to increase their global footprint, their global influence. When they come to Zimbabwe, they say that there can be no partnership, lasting partnership with ZANU-PF. Here, thanks a lot. I hear the word, let's say, dignity. There's no lasting, dignified partnership with ZANU-PF. So I feel like God showing me that these Saudi Arabians or GCC people, they have tested the ZANU-PF people. They've seen that they've got no moral compass. Because of that, there can be no long-term planning or long-term growth trajectory with people who have got no moral conviction whatsoever. Remember, when we're talking about Gulf countries, we're talking about Islamic, Arabic countries. These people that are strongly convicted by religious practices by the Quran, and the JCC itself is brought together because of their religious conviction. And therefore, when you come to a country like Zimbabwe, where people leadership is just corrupt, they just see government money as coffers that they must siphon for their own selves and their families and nobody else. Yet if you look at Saudi Arabia, a country that is run by a kingdom that is run by a family. Imagine, it is a family that runs the Saudi Arabia, yet that family does not see it fit that it takes all of the money to itself and leave everybody else poor. That family makes sure that it runs the whole country for everyone in the country. And that is why you see that there is stability in GCC. I know, as I said before, that I know I've saved a lot of Saudi Arabians over the past many years in working in Islamic places here in Cape Town. So I do understand what kind of people they are. I do understand their moral conviction, even their own children, the way they are so full of respect, their work ethic. I mean, even their women, the way that they have respect the men, the way that they respect other people, and I do believe that they understand wealth and they understand community, building interrelations within their community. That is why when they come to Cape South Africa, they come mostly to these Cape Muslims and stuff like that. So they do obviously have an interest in extending their range even outside the Arabic world, outside the Muslim world as well. So God has been showing me that they have been sponsoring ZANU-PF, but then they are not happy with that relationship, and they are now beginning to look to other Zimbabweans who are not ZANU-PF in order to be able to groom Zimbabwe. You see, when you talk about countries leading other countries, unlike people talk about foreign influence, they say it in such a propagandistic manner that serves narrow party and personal interests over country. Because a country that is in frontier markets, a country that is a third world country, even though we don't use that word anymore, a country that is developing, it needs to be in partnership with other well-developed countries. It needs to get that influence and support from well-developed countries, because well-developed countries can help you stabilize your economy, stabilize your politics, and really help to rope you along into this global network of countries. So saying that you do not want foreign influence in your country as if you are America does not work. Well, when the Americans say that, it is because America is number one. They are the ones who are influencing, and therefore they are saying it from the perspective of their direct competitors, who are like the Russians and the Chinese, who might want to undermine American democracy so that they overtake the United States. So the dynamics are not the same when we're dealing with lower level countries like Zimbabwe. You actually do acquire need to acquire direct foreign intervention within your sovereignty. Of course, obviously, within the confines of your own sovereignty. You are your own sovereign, but however, you need the relations and with other better countries that can influence you and put you in a trajectory that is going to take you far. You see, if we are going to be dealing with the mining industry in Zimbabwe and the extraction of underground resources and the oil that I told you we're gonna invent, we are going to discover, you will need to be in partnership with countries. And by the way, when I say countries, I'm also talking about companies from those countries, companies that are going to help you extract those resources, companies that are going to help you be in different industries, companies of with good intentions. So I propose that the GCC countries and the companies in from the GCC who actually do have a moral conviction based on their Islamic faith, which is a faith in God, are actually better positioned to help a run-down country like Zimbabwe, where moral conviction has been thrown out of the window because of our past and the pain that we've had, and because the fact that if you look at our Europe and UK specifically and the Americans, their track record with countries like ours is it's not even a good track record at all. It's a record of raping poor countries. It's a record of abusing them, putting bad leaders on top, purposefully putting despots and dictators who hate their own people solely for the sake of being able to manipulate the economies. Look at the scandal of Glencore that has rocked the news this week, and Glencore is also in Zimbabwe as well. And you discover that these big multinationals that are from the west, they bring out the west out of anybody. So you want firms like Saudi Aramco, and other GCC backed, based companies. Look at Dubai, the growth of Dubai, and you see what can happen to a nation, when they are convicted to build a nation together, and how they work with other people. You will see that in the Gulf countries, even when they are building their big buildings, they take the best talent from Europe, from America. So what I like about the GCC guys is that they are able to work with the Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese and still maintain good relations. You see, us in Africa, our problem is that these guys who fight over us as if like it's a girl who's with four guys fighting over a girl, and one guy must win. So they are looking at us from that perspective. So if you are going to be in line with the GCC network, you are able, therefore, to engage with the rest of the world from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. So, if we are going to have a relationship with the United States, for example, we already have a relationship with the GCC world because of our backup from the GCC. America will look at us the way that they look at Saudi Arabia. You understand? Americans can say what they say about Saudi Arabia, but they respect them. One thing that they know, that Saudi Arabia is strategically positioned in the global power to be able to be respected by any other nation. Understand? Because oil is very essential in this global economy. Remember, in the early 1970s, the oil prices went up because of oil problems. In the oil crisis of the 1972-1973. That is when the world learned that oil is a very strategic resource. That is why now the petrodollars are important. That is why the United States respects the GCC countries, even though they don't like them. Obviously, they don't like anybody else, but they respect them. So you see, Zimbabwe, for us to grow, our foreign policy we have to pivot towards the GCC, because I believe that we're going to be treated better there, and we also have access to a very strategic resource, which is oil, and of which I know that we're going to find our own. We will drill our own, and before we do find ours, we are able to have our own oil reserves, because we've got oil in Angola nearby, we've got oil in Nigeria, and offshore Ghana, and then having that good relationship with GCC, who have got a good oil infrastructure and knowledge, so their knowledge base of that industry will be able to secure a country to be an oil rich nation. I believe we must turn Zimbabwe to be an oil rich nation. Even if we are not drilling it from our own ground, we should be able to be securing as much oil as possible during global downturns, because we know that the price of oil will always oscillate. The price of oil will always oscillate from very lately. I mean, remember during COVID, at some point the price of oil was in the negatives, because there was no storage space in the world, because the globe was put on a hold because of COVID. And you do know that the OPEC countries always try to change production levels, whether to up the production levels, or to lower production levels, depending on the global supply and global supply and demand uh, uh, whatever. I forgot the word I want to use there. So uh, the oil and supply and demand imperatives, that's what I want to say. So then what we need there is to have a very robust relationship with such an advanced network of friends like the GCC. You don't want to have an oil relationship with America, because America is only interested in American oil uh, sustenance, independence. They are seeking American energy independence for America only, and they don't care about anything else. If they to put you under the bus, as long as it means American energy independence, so be it. So you don't want to be in a number one partnership with people who think like that. Do you understand? I'm not saying don't have relations with American oil firms. I mean, the American oil companies, the frackers, are having a tough time to have a good relationship with their own Americans. What more Zimbabweans? So you get to understand now why we actually need to have strategic and good relationships with the GCC countries. It is pertinent for our economic and strategic influence, even politically. It is a strategic political influence to be aligned with the GCC. The West is actually falling. The power of the West is dwindling a little bit. It's not going to be taken away, all of it, from them, but it is dwindling a little bit. And looking into the West is really not the best policy for an emerging country like Zimbabwe. So you see, now I am paving a way for our country to find a way in which we can actually be strategically poised to grow in influence politically and economically. So you choose your friends wisely. You choose your friends wisely. You see, the problem that I have with the Americans and the West in particular is judging by history, judging by the relations we had with them. Look, let's take a look at the Bretton Woods institutions of 1944. Let's take a look at the IMF, the World Bank, and the pact that we had with America for them to become the world reserve currency. Now let me just take a look at that and say 2 or 3 points on that thing. Well, when the Americans came out on top at the end of the Second World War, because they're the ones who were supplying the people that were at war. Take note, the ones supplying the people that are at war. Whilst they're destroying each other, they are supplying and they are becoming richer. So they took over the world and they put us on a gold standard. Okay, so because America had 80% of the global gold, and we all agreed to be led by them. Then come 1971 when President Nixon decided to take America out of the gold standard. That was a shock, an announcement that came out of nowhere. Something that the Zimbabwean government has done before, shocking the Zimbabweans, telling them that today your $1,000 in the bank is now worth $10. Essentially, without getting deeper to the explaining, essentially, if you're a Zimbabwean, if you remember that, that's exactly what Richard Nixon did in 1971. Basically, making I mean, confiscating money so that it belongs to the US government and making everybody else poor. So we cannot trust them because of that. Again, the Bretton Woods institutions, look at the IMF and their SDRs, those special drawing rights. These are actually, most of it is American dollars mostly and other currencies from around the world, but it's mostly American dollars, which now are not even backed by gold. Remember, as I told you, when Nixon took Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard in 1971, it meant that the US dollar is no longer backed by gold, but it is gold. It is backed by nothing. It is essentially a fiat. They can talk about the gold that it is there, but that gold is close to meaningless, because the more we do quantitative easing, the less and less it is more linked to gold. So they are just saying that there is some gold that it backs it up, but essentially speaking, really it is essentially a fiat, which is just it means that that money is created out of thin air. Do you understand? In any case, philosophically, I do not believe that money should be backed by anything tangible anyway. I do believe that the gold standard is an outdated thing, and we shouldn't be we shouldn't base your currency on anything in any matter. I think that money should be viewed from a different perspective. On the next video, I'm going to speak about my perspective of money. I'm going to qualify that we should not be under any standard at all except to make money total fiat. And money should be totally a fiat currency that is backed by the integrity of the issuer of that currency, and it should be used solely as a lubricator within the economic system, as a store of value and as something that we can use to exchange goods and services, and not itself being something that has got intrinsic value per se. So getting out of the gold standard is not a bad thing, but then the fact that when we get out of the standard, it is you who benefits and everybody else fails. And also, when we get to have this IMF that is borrowing to countries, and that the SDRs are mostly US dollars, which are backed by nothing. So when these poorer countries are borrowing money from the IMF and the World Bank, these so-called super countries like the Americans and stuff like that, they come heavy on governments that owe their money, and they want these governments to pay back the money as quickly as possible. It is difficult for government to pay back money that has been created out of thin air. In fact, I will prove to you that it is not possible to pay back fiat currency, because fiat is created on credit. It is created because there is a physical asset that is present. We create fiat currency to represent that physical asset. So when you say the government must pay back, you are actually saying that you want to contract the monetary supply. If you're contracting the monetary supply, you are actually saying that you are removing the money representation of the physical asset that is there. So what the point I'm saying, that once fiat currency has been created and it is represent a physical asset that exists, it should not be destroyed anymore, because that asset exists. Understand? So in terms of government, the government being the one that is governing the country's resources, if it gets fiat from the World Bank, and that money is used, to buy or to lubricate the economy, on assets that already exist. That money must not go back to the World Bank and be cancelled out, because there already is physical assets that have to have that must derive a certain amount. I know that's very difficult for you to understand. If I might have lost a lot of people, but bear with me. The point is that these loans that the IMF gives to these poor countries, they are suffocating them. You see, when they come with their economists, they will tell you that you must practice fiscal discipline, uh, and then you must practice austerity. Austerity measures are actually meant to kill the economy. Okay, governments in poor countries that have borrowed money from the IMF must not be paying that money immediately. In fact, because that money that is borrowed from the IMF is backed by a US dollar, which is backed by nothingness, the amount of interest which you must pay to IMF must be close to zero, just like the United States pays close to zero interest rate to the Federal Reserve. You see, they lie to us and say because there is less risk in the American government. That is a lie. Risk is a risk. There's the same risk in the American government and in the Venezuelan government and in the Zimbabwean government. The Americans will not and will never be able to pay the mounting debt that they always increase every year. But they will tell us an economic lie because they are economic hitmen. They will tell us a lie and say that their country is safer, they will not default, therefore the interest rates in an American bond, in an American 10-year, will oscillate between 2% and 1.5%, and then the 10-year bond in South African currency, in South African government will be like 9-10%, in the Zimbabwean government will be like 20%. You understand? This is suffocating countries. It's an unjust suffocating countries. We should not be suffocated that way, especially that when these countries are getting money from the IMF and the World Bank, these are not supposed to be profit-making institutions. These are supposed to be developmental institutions. So when they borrow us money, that money mustn't come with interest rate that is suffocating, especially knowing that the money itself that they are borrowing us is actually fiat. It is not backed by gold or anything, because the special drawing rights are mostly US dollars, and the US dollars are mostly backed by anything that comes out of the mouth of Jerome Powell. Holy is the Lord. Don't play. So that is why now it is imperative for a country like Zimbabwe to run its own monetary policy wisely. I would suggest that as a nation of Zimbabwe, we no longer borrow money from the IMF or the World Bank. That is point number one. Number two, that money that we owe them, we will pay them in the next 200 years. They should take it or leave it. We don't have the money. We are not going to be paying 15-20% interest rates on money that is actually based on nothingness. That is nothing, because now what they do now, they will begin to use that fact that you owe them money, and then they will begin to attach the assets of a nation to them. That is a way of stealing and siphoning assets of poor countries, and that has to stop. Understand? So that is why I am saying that we are not going to be looking to the West, to the economists of the West, because the economists of America, the economists of Europe, they know damn well what they are doing. They know damn well that they are stealing from African countries. That is why it is important for them to put politicians who do not understand politics, or who do not understand economics, or who understand economics from their own school of thought, who school them and put these hard, big economic terms as if like we do not know what we are doing, well, as if we do not know what is going on. So those people that know what they are doing, they will not put them into power. Yes, they do this because they are coming from a rotten moral compass. They are immoral. It is immorality to use economics learned professors to lie to African governments in order to siphon their resources. Therefore, that is why it is imperative now as African people to look in the morality of the nations that we become friends with. Hence, I say that the GCC nations have got a higher moral standards than the Europeans or the Americans or the Chinese or the Russians. Therefore, for African countries to grow tremendously, we must pivot towards Doha. We must pivot toward Saudi Arabia. We must pivot toward UAE. We must pivot toward the GCC network of countries because of their good moral standing. And we should be very wise in the way we deal with the IMF and the Reserve Bank. And I would like to put it across that all African countries should not pay back the debt of the IMF. It must be cancelled totally because it is based on nothing else. If they want us to pay back that money, first of all, you are going to freeze the interest rates, and we'll pay that money over the next 300-year period. If not, then we get out of the IMF, we get out of the World Bank, and then we pivot to GCC. Holy is the Lord. My name is Ngobani Zon. Watch me on the next video.